Welcome to the Occupational Safety Leadership Podcast, episode number 82. In this one, we're going to talk about respirable particle size. Um, Lungs are a fantastic invention, of course. They're part of the whole gas exchange system, oxygen, and of course, it gets rid of the carbon dioxide and other things that our body is making as we're breathing and exercising and just everyday life. So we're just going to sit down and talk about what we can breathe in and what we can't breathe in then. So let's just dive right into it. So the lungs have a massive surface area and they filter out the larger particles, but those nanoparticles are going to get through. That respirable range is less than 10 microns. And that doesn't mean everything at 10 microns is getting through. So at about 4% microns, I'm sorry, at about 4 microns, about 50% of the particles can be deposited in the lungs. The rest are never settle and then they're exhaled. Well, part of it, of course, is there's the gas exchange system. And as these pollutants get into our gas, of course, they can then be sent to the blood, and the blood, of course, can then deposit these things in various parts of our body. They can end up in the body's filters, other parts of the lungs, of course. And when you think about the liver, the kidney, it can also go across the blood-brain barrier. And sometimes it doesn't do anything but stay inside the blood, of course. It is then grabbed by the liver, uh, kidneys, and all that, your body's filters, and then they're sent out then. So, um, but obviously, the scary part is you can't see these things. So you don't know if you're breathing in oxygen or you're breathing in other pollutants. The human nose is not very good at determining if something is hazardous or not hazardous then. So let's just kind of sit down. We'll talk about the sizes that can enter because what we're talking about are things that we can't even see at this point. So let's try and put it into a little bit of perspective. So when we think about the respirable particle size then at 10 microns, which you get about half will go into a human hair is 70 microns in going across the width of it then. So when we sit down and break it down, 10 of course is really small compared to 70. And then when we think about the airborne dust that we can see, and we can kind of see that as we're kind of sitting very still, the light hits it just right. That's typically about 30. Very fine beach sand is about 90 across then. So what we're talking about is a very fine particle that you cannot see with the human eyes then. So and if we look at where these lodge inside of our air sacs, of course, then when we think about anything from about, now these are approximate numbers, so you can't take this as a 100%. This happens every single time, but it's a general rule of thumb here. 5.5 to 10 is going to lodge in the nose and the throat area then. So, and a lot of these, of course, are too big and then they go back down, but we know some get through. So typically the 3.3 to 3.5 are going to end up in the main breathing passages. As the lungs kind of get, as the air passages get smaller, we have the 2 to the 3.3 end up in the smaller ones, smaller breathing passages. 1 to about 2 end up in the bronchial, and the air sacs at about zero point 0.3 to about 1. So this is kind of when we talk about PM10, particulate matter 10. So I was talking about 10 microns then. As you can see, the obviously smaller it gets, the farther it goes into your lungs, the easier it is to then be sent to the bloodstream, and from the bloodstream, of course, throughout the body. So many of us have heard in the news and, of course, other things when it talks about particulate matter of 10 microns or less, that's considered to be bad. And this is exactly what we're talking about today at 10 microns then. So, and many of us have heard about warnings for air quality at the PM 2.5 at that level. And that's, of course, 2.5 microns then. So at that level, we know that most of it at that is going to enter our lungs, and there's of course obviously that uh, very big possibility it ends up in the blood. From the blood, of course, it goes throughout the body. And when we look at these, of course, these are mostly contributed to. Now, this is not a 100% hard and fast rule, but when you think about wood fires, the exhausts from automobiles and trucks, power plants, the sulfur dioxide, the nitrogen dioxide. And then when we switch gears and we look over at industry, you have your individual chemicals out there, but the one that always seems to jump out is going to be silica. So silica, of course, is that super fine sand at this size. You can't see it, you can't smell it, you can't. And so that's one of the bad things. And many of these, when they're in that really small size, they kind of almost look like in the form of like silica and asbestos and all that. There's almost like a little hook on it, like a little barb, like a fishing hook then. So, and of course, I'm not talking about like a real big prominent J, but when you kind of think about how like a fishing hook can have like a little barb on there, so it does a very good job of binding right to things because it's doing exactly what it's supposed to do. I mean, it's actually trying to bind to things then. And that is it for respirable particle size then. So this was just a very short and sweet intro into the size. Um, I know that when I think about this, I always have to sit down and say, all right, what I'm really talking about to now, of course, this is me talking to me, is I'm talking about things I can't see, I can't smell, I can't taste, I can't. So there's always ways to go back and monitor. You can monitor for particle counters and everything else, but the bad part, of course, is that it doesn't tell you what the source of it is then. So is it from truck exhaust? Is it from other things? Now you can get yourself some really fancy particle counters, but you can also have everyday dirt, dust, and pollen out there too. So it makes it really hard to sit down and protect yourself against these particles. So episode number 82 is done. Thank you so much for joining me today. My name is Dr. David Ayers. Thank you and have a safe day.